Pour them into the sink.
Excuse me?
Just empty every bottle to the very last drop.
It's just they are toxic chemicals and the regulation states that...
Pour them right down the drain, Mr. Kim.
If I pour them in the drain, they run into the Han River.
That's right. Let's just dump them in the Han River.
But, this is not just any toxic chemicals, so you
The Han River is very broad, Mr. Kim. Let's try to be broad-minded about this. Anyway, that's an order. So, start pouring.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is the fear of God. Hello, and welcome to the Fear of God podcast. We are so glad you're here for this episode and this installment of our umbrella series for the year, that of 2020. We hope you all have been enjoying the series because we sure have. To know exactly what it's all about, go back and listen to our pre-cap episode from the end of January for deeper insight. But basically, you all are voting on your favorite horror films from the last 20 years, and we are covering one from each year. We stepped into the light with Shadow of the Vampire, then Steve Beckley helped renew our commitment to sparkle motion with Donnie Darko. After that, we roamed a viral wasteland, and 28 days later, next, we stopped off to see Captain Spaulding at the House of a Thousand Corpses. Blake Collier joined us in the bathroom for 2004's Saw, and last week, foreign correspondent and Secretary of State in the Fog 2020 cabinet Vera Gowdy helped us parse our thoughts on Hard Candy. And this week, we go back to Korea to check in on our friend, Bong Joon-Ho. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse. And typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And guys, Reed was here, but then he farted. And I could just tell he was in a B+ condition. And strange as it sounds, he fell asleep from lack of protein. It's a thing, y'all. It's a little Lackey secret there. But he'll come to, hopefully, in time for the conversation. But even if he doesn't, we've got some surprises left for you here. In the meantime, it has been a year of guests, speaking of surprises, and we've got another one for you today. Ladies and gentlemen, I know her as Sophie from the BFG. What? But you'll get to know her as co-host of her own podcast, Death by Monsters. Friends and Foggers, allow me to introduce and welcome for the first time to the show, Paula Deming. Paula.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited, and I'm also excited that I get the reference you just made about Reed, because I watched the movie we're talking about.
Good. It would have been a little awkward had you not. Now, Paula, I know you know this, but we want listeners, you know this as a podcaster yourself, especially new listeners, to know that at the Fear of God, we explore the holy and the horrific at the intersection of faith and fear, dissecting what scares us in order to find what saves us. And if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, listener, come find us on Twitter, on Instagram, join us in the Facebook group for lively discussions. Because here at the Fear of God, we explore. We don't explain, except for right now. What I'm going to explain, that you can listen to The Fear of God on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, CastBox, anywhere podcasts are sold. While you're at it, put on that face mask, wash those hands, and then go subscribe to us on your favorite platform. And if said platform is iTunes, be so kind as to leave us a 5-star rating or a glowing review. You can also find us on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you'll find an episode archive and you'll be able to purchase merchandise from the show. See fellow foggers and their fog swag like t-shirts, mugs, cell phone cases, pillows. Reed! Hey, buddy, you woke up. Looks like you cleared the room too.
Yeah, B+ for sure.
B plus.
Reed,
for
Paula,
sure.
Reed, I don't know if you have a guest. You just,
Oh, sorry. I usually only do that when it's just you and I.
Man,
in the
I
room,
may
but
have to leave now. Let's be real.
I'm sorry. This is not comfortable for mixed company. So there it is. Paula,
Hey,
hi.
Hello,
Reed.
Reed.
Reed, did you know that Paula was actually one of our very first listeners to review us on iTunes?
I did know that, and I want to thank you very, very much for that.
Hey.
All those years
Here we
ago.
are.
You are very, very welcome. It was my pleasure.
So obviously the way that I most directly know you is through our mutual friend Nathan. But also we are master escape artists, like another individual
We sure are.
in this film. So we ourselves all participated along with some other dear friends of Nathan's for an escape room. It was my very first ever escape room.
It was my first ever escape room as well.
We made it out. That
We
was
did.
really that
I
was
did
really
not
exciting.
contribute to that at all, though. I will say, I think I did no solving of any clues. I just was like encouragement all the way.
You know what? Everybody needs a cheerleader, so that's a vital role. Okay, it's an
you.
essential role in these essential times. No, sincerely, it's really good to have you finally on the show. We're so glad you're here. Now, between the three of us, I think there's really no argument who the veteran podcaster is in this little conversation. So you yourself are actually a seasoned podcaster, but I think there's a show.
Well,
that,
I don't know about seasoned, but I do a
Hey.
number of. I podcast in a number of places.
But no, sincerely, there's a show that you do that is wildly popular, and I think that our listeners, if they don't already know about it, would love to hear about it. Can you tell them about your new favorite show?
Yeah, well, I am one of 3 co-hosts for a show called Death by Monsters, a comedy podcast all about monsters, mysteries, and the unknown. So we, like I said, it's a comedy podcast. We take I'll say irreverent occasionally, look at the supernatural, the paranormal, mysteries, cryptids, anything kind of weird, creepy, or strange, we talk about on the podcast. One of our hosts, Matthew, does a ton of research and presents stories to us, like the existence of Bigfoot that he truly believes in. And then my other co-host and I, Nick, come in with our varying degrees of skepticism, and we just talk about whether or not we believe any of the stuff that Matthew has told us. And yeah, if that sounds like a thing you would like, and I feel like people who are into the Fear of God podcast might be into the kinds of things we're talking about over there, give it a listen, give it a whirl, start at the beginning, I would say. But yeah,
Awesome.
Well, and we're talking about a monster movie today, so it is appropriate.
we sure
Absolutely.
are.
So we always like to do this, particularly with first-time guests. We have 2 sort of key core questions that we like to ask. I'll start with a bit of a
Tell
more
us about your
existential one.
childhood.
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
Can
I'm
you?
kidding.
Well, I was a weird kid, and not much has changed.
It all began.
Pretty much the same way I always was.
I was born at an early age.
I feel
so
like
what
my
we'll-
southern accent is gonna come out in this recording right now.
Well,
just from
I
being
mean-
around you two, I'll say it.
Yeah, I was gonna say you got a Carolina guy and a Georgia boy here, so
it is.
It's
It
gonna
is
happen.
or
going
should
to.
I
We
say
got-
a Georgia boy?
It is inevitable. But no, so we have 2 questions. The first one I'll lob at you is tell us a little bit about your own particular personal histories with the horror genre specifically, and also possibly its intersection, or separate to that, your own sort of faith conditioning that you're coming from.
Yeah, so I have an interesting relationship with horror films. I have an incredibly active imagination. And so I personally feel like I need to be very careful what I expose myself to, because that'll stick in my brain. And then at 3 a.m, I'll wake up thinking about it. So I'm not as well seasoned in the horror genre as either of you.
Okay.
I would say. I kind of grew up with this idea, and one of the things that I love about this show specifically it challenges this perception, this idea that I grew up with. I grew up with this idea that, be careful, little eyes, what you see. And
right.
And should I be exposing myself to these things? Is that the kind of thing that God would want me to be seeing or thinking about or whatever? And what I love specifically about this show is how we can look at a lot of these things in these movies and find God in them, or find lessons in them that speak to human truths that can in their own way be healing, I think. So that's kind of my feeling about the horror genre. And there's some parts of the genre that I know I need to stay away from, and there are some that I can dive in wholeheartedly. So that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
Awesome.
That was a really good response. I'm gonna Venmo you those $5.
Hey, thank you so much. Totally worth the amount of time it took me to prepare that statement.
not only a really stellar co-host, but also our accountant. He
That's why we have no money.
So thank you again for your kind words. The second question that we like to ask is just, what scares you? You have a vivid imagination, so the list may be long. My drink cup is full, so what scares Paula?
I mean, just about anything will scare me. For me, in terms of just like horror films, what scares me are stories about demons and possession, and so like The Exorcist or anything that kind of delves into that world, I find very scary because I think it's real. I always feel kind of weird saying that, but maybe this isn't a place where I need to feel weird about that.
No, not at all.
I find that a lot scarier than like a slasher movie or a monster movie. Yeah.
You know what's
that is what scares me.
So what's interesting about that, so I always like to point out to people when they specifically cite that supernatural films are their Achilles heel, I always like to point out to people, if you don't already know, that The Exorcist is my favorite film. That is my very favorite movie. Not just horror film, like favorite movie.
It scares me so much.
Yeah, which
I've seen
I always
once.
like.
I can never watch it again.
Oh man, I love the film so much. Actually, just recently rewatched it. Just had it on because
just had
Shudder,
it on. This movie that scarred you. I just had it on in the background. I need to get some work done.
As one does. Folding some laundry.
To relax, there's nothing like that, But because Shudder recently did this. They had this great series. It's a Shudder original series called Cursed Films, and it's only a 5-episode series, but it's a little like 30-minute documentary style on films, horror films specifically, that have a reputation for their productions or their impact being specifically
really interesting.
Cursed. It is a fascinating documentary, and their very first episode was on The Exorcist. So I was like, oh man, it's been a couple of days since I've seen this. I should see it again. So but it's funny. What scares me in terms of like films, it's interesting. You talk about the realness of the spiritual nature of it. So I feel like in some ways I'm a bit of an anomaly in the category that I do. As well, authentically believe in so many of those sort of spiritual warfare dynamics, which actually, I think, with my particular sensibilities, inoculates me to the fear factor in films like that. It just a different approach. Just that's not my point in saying that.
But, yeah.
But what really unnerves me is monster or creature films of nature, like the Jaws, recent Crawl. Those movies have a tendency to really unnerve me, and it is a lot in the same way of what you described, because I know that nature is completely unsentimental, and so if I were to be in a condition where a shark had me on its radar, I would be pretty helpless to
you
to a large degree.
You have no power over nature. Yeah,
exactly. And so that kind of gets under my skin in the same way that some people would describe their similar reactions to like the spiritual warfare dynamics. So it's always interesting to hear what particularly pushes people's buttons and anything. But
for what it's worth, Reed, I mean, if you and I were out in the ocean and a shark were upon us, I think you're probably safe. At least for a little bit. It's probably coming at
I've
me
got a
first.
good 3 minutes there that I can get a head start.
Well,
Just
it depends on
randomly.
which one of you is already bleeding, I feel
Right,
like.
right.
Oh,
Tell my family I love them. You know, Paula, you wouldn't know this, but Reed and I have this year begun an off-format sort of sub-category to our show called B-Sides. Like the old cassette tapes, B-Sides.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, last week or 2 weeks ago, I got a fun idea for one where Reed was just telling the plot of the entire franchise of the Saw films. Well, I just got inspired by y'all's back and forth for a whole other B-side, Reed. And this, you know, do what you will with this, Reed, to the typewriter, right? So
To the typewriter.
I just have this vision of B-sides, Reed and The Exorcist somehow. I'll come up with a catchier title, but like it's Reed pitching to people who've never seen The Exorcist to watch The Exorcist, and then he debriefs with them. It's like, you know, you got your little old ladies, you know, like, okay, Grandma, you're going to watch The Exorcist, and they're going to talk about it. I would love to listen to Reed traumatize these people. with The Exorcist.
Y'all are going to need to proceed without me because I have a new project that
just got
requires,
inspired. Yeah.
it requires my immediate attention. My immediate attention.
All right. Well, let's you know, while you're brainstorming that, Riri. So I almost forgot, Reed, you're my running mate in this election year.
Aww.
You know, we've got the 2020 aesthetic going on, and I don't know if you heard, buddy, but Wisconsin had a rather contested primary vote just yesterday.
Ooh.
And and by we, I mean you and I and all the foggers, we overcame all those scurrilous goings-on associated, and we won!
We won?
We won in Wisconsin. Turns out...
I keep waiting for the day that you're going to tell me, hey, this primary happened and we didn't win. I keep waiting for that day to happen.
Well, you know, it's our show, so... You can more or less plan
If
on
you
that.
can't win here, where can you
Exactly.
win, honestly?
If you can't win here, you can't win
It's
anywhere.
too real,
Riri.
Paula. Too real. No.
You know, whether it's Reed, whether it's Riri, you know, so many names. You have the Exorcist guy.
Do people call me that? I don't remember.
You know, I'm it's a work in progress. I'm
so what's really
testing
funny?
some stuff out. What?
No, what's really funny about that? Shout out in case he listens to this episode to MJ, to my buddy MJ, who actually hosted in Bakersfield.
Michael Jackson?
Well, he didn't host it, but no. Oh, even better than Michael Jackson.
Jordan.
No. Co-host of the podcast Real
Magic
Perspective.
Johnson.
Nathan, let me finish the story. So, co-host of the podcast Real Perspective. So what's funny about you saying that is that he actually just 2 years ago invited me to a screening of The Exorcist at the Fox Theater in Bakersfield, where I had the distinct privilege of actually making the opening remarks to the screening of The Exorcist, which was really a profound privilege of mine. And what was the reason the whole reason I'm bringing that up is because he and his wife were recently watching something where I came up, and she was like, "Oh, is he that Exorcist guy?" so there is actually somebody who calls me the Exorcist guy. So
yeah,
yes,
I'm sure that now there are going to be plenty of others. But
There's gonna be a
meanwhile, not in this moment are you the Exorcist guy. Right now, Riri, you are Lackey the Listicle, my occasionally listless list-making lackey. Would you, my friend, would you enumerate for us? Tell the listeners, and Paula, if she doesn't know, about 2020 and how they can continue to assist us in this series.
I would be delighted to do that. Not in this voice though.
Lackey's not here anymore.
What an excellent day for a list. So what I'm gonna do is explain to you, because your time is limited, ladies and gentlemen. As of this episode, this is your last chance, your last week to participate in our listener-voted surveys on your favorite films from each year, starting in the year 2000 and going all the way through 2020. So we're doing this in little phases, and the end of phase 1 is nigh, much to our sadness, but we're on to some really exciting things from there. So if you go right now to thefearofgodpodcast.com, click on the banner that is at the top of the page, it will take you to the survey page where, as of this week, you can still cast your votes for your favorite horror films of 2000 2008. 2008, as of this week, is the only survey that is still available. If you want to cast your vote there, go to 2008, cast your vote for your favorites, and we are going to count down that list of your favorite horror films of each year right here on the show. So go to thefearofgodpodcast.com, follow the banner, cast your vote, get out the vote, and we will see you right back here for your top 10 list. It is very exciting. I've been enjoying this series a ton. I don't know if the listeners have, but this has been a lot of fun for me. So that brings us to, Nathan, are you ready?
I'm ready. Paula, you ready?
Paula, you ready?
Oh, boy, am I ready.
So we are going to count down right now for you listeners. Wait no further. We are going to count down your favorite horror films of the year 2006. Paula, as our guest, you have the distinct privilege of kicking off the list at number 10. And then, Nathan, you will follow her, and we will go around that way until we finish the list. So, would you do the honors of kicking the list off?
The problem is I'm going to have to pronounce names here, I've realized. People's names. I don't know how any of y'all say your names.
You can't do any worse than Blake Collier a couple weeks ago, I promise.
He holds the key. I think that's, he's the king.
At number 10, you have Saw 3, directed by Darren Lynn Bousman.
That's the way I would say it. I think that's right. I think
Thank
that's
you.
absolutely correct. So, listeners, obviously, we covered Saw a couple of weeks ago with fellow resident fogger Blake Collier, and it's interesting because it skipped a year. Saw 2 did not make our list last year, I don't believe, but here, just coming in at the bottom of the top 10 is Saw 3, which I do find pretty interesting. You can go back and listen to our episode with Blake to hear our thoughts not only on the original installment, but on kind of the franchise as a whole. So, your number 10, Saw 3. Nathan?
Number 9 is a foreign film that you have referenced at some time in the last 6 months on the show.
Yes.
The non-English version of the title is Ills, but I'm not sure where this is from, so I'm not going to say where it's from.
French.
That's where
It's a French-Romanian film.
Ooh la la. In parentheses, it says them, so presumably Ills is the word them in either
That is
French
correct.
or Romanian. Directed by David Moreau and Xavier Palud. I have never seen this.
Paula, have you seen it?
I haven't, but I'm intrigued by the title.
Yeah,
Them.
it's a home invasion film.
Maybe I shouldn't watch it. That's another
Yeah.
thing that scares me.
Yeah, and it's
We're just going to
pretty-
discover all the things throughout this conversation.
all the things scare me, basically.
that
It's
one
amazing
too.
that I do a podcast about monsters and mysteries and ghosts, because I'm like, y'all.
You don't even know. You don't know. It has been, as it often is with these entries in the list, it's been some time since I've seen it, but I do remember it being incredibly tense, pretty brief, I think like in the 75-80 minute mark, so digestible in that way, but indeed a very taut and high tension kind of film. Not high tension itself, but
Nope.
Ills. Okay, so your number 8, listeners. There's no other way to introduce this mother effing movie than to say that your number 8 is Mother Effing Snakes on a Mother Effing Plane, directed by one Mr. David R. Ellis. Yes, indeed, Snakes on a Plane, which I think is an absolutely ridiculous, absurd film. It was a lot of fun. I remember the big deal being made about it when it came out was that they were releasing a film called Snakes on a Plane, starring Samuel L. Jackson, and the internet took over, and the internet said, if Samuel L. Jackson doesn't at some point say, I want these mother effing snakes off this mother effing plane, then I want my money back.
So they went, all right.
They literally called him back and reshot a scene so that he
amazing.
could say that exact line. It is a true story. Have
Nick
either
Fury,
of you seen
ladies
this?
and gentlemen. No.
I've seen like a little bit of it, but I haven't seen the whole thing.
It is. It's pretty ridiculous. It is exactly what it sounds like. I mean, that is.
I do love horror comedy, so
It's It's got that tone. It's definitely got that tone, and it's your number 8 favorite horror film in this list. So, Paula, number 7.
number 7 is Silent Hill, directed by Christoph Gans.
Yes.
I questioned if I should say the S at the end, so I made it a bit.
Yeah, it worked. It worked.
Thank you.
Either of you seen this?
Nope.
So this kind of the best thing about this film, it has been years since I've seen it. I don't remember loving it, but I remember two things about it that I did love at the time. I remember not really being very fond of the movie as a whole, but I thought it had tremendous atmosphere, and I thought the creature design was fantastic. So it has been some time since I've actually sat and watched the film, but I remember being really creeped out by the creature design. It's got a very mist-riddled, fog-riddled environment in which everything is taking place, which really amps up the creepy atmosphere. So, maybe worth a revisit at some point.
Based on a video game.
Have
too,
you?
yeah.
It is,
I was gonna say, have you
yes.
played the video game?
Nope.
I did, and I've played that. I played Resident Evil. Usually my experience with some of those horror-based video games is I usually play it for like a little while, and very few of them have I actually had the stamina to finish, and Silent Hill was among those. But I remember being very impressed with its general story and gameplay, and maybe it's time to revisit the film, too.
They have it's a sort of Silent Hill. It's called PT. It's just a playable trailer that they made for a Silent Hill game that never came out. That is one of the scariest things I have ever attempted to play.
Interesting. Okay.
Until the end. And then the end got frustrating. And then once you're frustrated in a video game, it's not scary anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then, but the beginning of it, it got me.
Oh, nice. Nathan, what's number 6?
Number 6, the only reason I know this film is it was part of the Monster Mash we did in 2017.
It was.
Goodness gracious. No, 18.
18, I think, yeah.
And that is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, directed by Scott Glosserman. Never seen it.
Paula, have you seen it?
Nope.
Y'all, this movie is
I've
fantastic.
seen two. I've seen 2 movies on this list.
All right.
You know what's funny
All right.
is you're one ahead of me on this. No, I'm at 2. That's right. Okay, I see it now.
I bet we've
Wow.
seen the same ones.
Probably.
That's my guess.
Maybe. Behind the Mask is an excellent film. It's a wonderful film. It spends the first hour being almost purely satirical, which is, along the lines of like a Tucker and Dale versus Evil, or
Which I love.
Yeah, like a straightforward horror comedy. So it spends the first hour being almost purely satire, and then the last half hour pivots to some remarkably effective scares. It's an excellent film, and it's a film I adore. I would highly recommend this film.
Is it based on something like the title is kind of odd? Like what?
Yeah, so I don't want to say too much because some of the narrative kind of props up the title, but I can share the premise. The premise is that there is a documentary filmmaking crew who have been invited to catalog and document as the title implies, the rise of a serial killer. So this is Leslie Vernon is intending to be a serial killer of the ilk and on the same shelf as a Jason Voorhees, a Freddy Krueger, those kind of things. And so that's what he's purporting to be, and he invites this documentary film crew. So what's great is that through the first hour, they're calling out tons of slasher tropes, and he's like, well, you got to do this. You've got to make sure that this happens. And so it's really clever in that way. But in the last half hour, when presumably like he is ready to emerge, it is actually remarkably scary. It's a really great film. It's very inventive. I'm very, very fond of it, honestly. I'd love for us to cover it someday because I think it's got a lot of interesting things to it. So yes, listeners, by all means.
Sold me on it. I might check that one out.
Yeah. You should definitely check it out. I highly recommend Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Number 5 is a film that is incredibly disturbing, but we were just talking about The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist. It is the film Bug. It's a little peek behind the curtain. I'm pretty sure neither of you have seen this film because if you're only 2 on the list, and I'm pretty sure which 2 those are.
Yeah, sure haven't seen this one. No.
One's the one we're talking about.
The Exorcist.
Yeah. Something about bugs? No, thank you.
What's interesting, so part of my memory of this, and I cannot recall her direct involvement, but I remember going in Charlotte, actually, at some point, to go and see the stage play of Bug. And I remember, and if she listens to this, which I don't know if she listens to our show, if she listens to this, then I'm going to have to apologize for not remembering the direct connection. But our mutual alum, Carrie Cranford, was in some way connected to why I went to go see it. I don't know if she stage managed the show or did costumes and props for it. I don't know exactly her involvement in the production because it was over a decade ago. And I went to see that stage show, and I remember really being kind of galvanized by the material. It's a really freaky sort of paranoia story. It's about, these
You
two
saw
people
the stage show before seeing the film?
Yes, I saw the stage show
okay.
before the film existed. And so this was actually the story revolves around two people who are kind of impoverished. They're kind of, for lack of a better designation, kind of trailer park folk, and they're both
This
down
is
on
Ashley
their luck.
Judd, right?
Is in the film, yes. Ashley
yeah.
Judd and Harry Connick Jr. plays it. Michael Shannon is the other person opposite Ashley Judd. And very early on in the film, these two people who are just kind of broken and kind of find each other and develop a burgeoning bit of a clunky relationship. It quickly becomes apparent that he is extremely paranoid, maybe even more severely mentally ill than we're aware of, or maybe he is actually on to a conspiracy happening right under their nose about an infestation that is occurring in their place. And so it tap dances around with a lot of interesting things like, conditions of mental illness, conspiracy theories, the dynamics of troublesome and codependent relationships. It's a fascinating film. Really fascinating film.
I've seen bits of this or seen maybe a YouTube video where someone was talking about it because that description sounds so familiar, and I feel like I've seen at least like clips from this movie actually.
Yeah. It is a really affecting film. It is not for the faint of heart. It is the play and the ultimate film were very disturbing and unsettling, but extremely interesting experiences. So it's a film I would cautiously recommend because its material is heavy and dark, but very effectively and powerfully made. So yes, that was your number 5 on this list. Paula, you get the distinction of announcing number 4.
Who could guess that this is one of the two I've seen? Number 4 is Lady in the Water, directed by M. Night Shyamalan, a movie with Bryce Dallas Howard in it, and a movie that I know a lot of people didn't like, but I really liked this movie.
I did too.
I went in knowing very little and completely being willing to just accept the fact that the characters kind of just accept what's going on.
Yes.
And I really liked it when I saw this.
And Nathan, you've seen it as well, right? This is the other one that you've seen?
Uh-huh. Yep.
So
I was not going to speak against our guest. No.
No, of course.
I don't have fond memories of this movie.
No, of course.
We can disagree.
Well, no. Actually, I've only seen it the one time. What stands out in my memory is, as a very high positive, is the Paul Giamatti breakdown scene late in the film. I don't even really remember the context of it. I just remember being moved by it.
Yeah.
But the negative for me, which again, perhaps a second viewing would iron out, is I was turned off rather quickly by the opening sort of credit sequence, which illustrates the exact story you're about to watch. And it just, I don't know, in my mind at the time, maybe I was just being too hoity-toity or what, but it was like, well, why do I need to sit and watch this now? You just
why keep watching? You've told me the whole story.
That happens. Yeah. But again, that was one viewing, and I don't know how a second viewing would change that.
So only, and I say this with tremendous confidence, only in a Fear of God list does this film make number 4. Only. Because I feel like in general our listeners are pretty forgiving of and fond of M. Night Shyamalan's work, because I think critically at large, this is a pretty, like, people cite The Village as like the beginning of the downfall of M. Night Shyamalan's temporary downfall of his career. Lady in the Water like almost cemented it. Like people hated Lady in the Water. For me, I feel like it has some structural problems that I can't defend. It's got some like way too much exposition. What I really responded to and still really respond to is its emotional quotient is extremely high. Like if you can get on the wavelength of what the film is striving for emotionally, I think it can be a very rewarding viewing experience. Also, there is an incredibly fascinating book, and now I'm about to bring up the book, and I'm not confident about what the title is.
You referenced it on Springtime for Shyamalan, though.
I did. I can find that title at some point and reference it back, but there was an entire book about basically M. Night Shyamalan's like risking his entire stability of his career to make Lady in the Water the way he wanted to make it. And it kind of identifies what might be a flaw of personality in just the way he navigates what he wants to do, but also makes a strong case for just sort of visionary creativity and really fighting for what you want a thing to be, that I found incredibly fascinating. But yeah, I have a real soft spot in my heart for Lady in the Water. It's definitely not going to make top tier in Shyamalan's output, but I'm a soft defender of it, especially as a overall viewing experience, because I think there's some good things going on there.
Well, like you, Paula, it is one of the only other two that I've seen. One of the only two I've seen on this list. Another that I've not seen is number 3, and that is directed by once more Guardian of the Galaxy James Gunn, that of Slither. I have not seen Slither because I remember seeing the trailer and it looked like it would make my skin crawl, and I did not.
It will.
This is Nathan Fillion, right?
I believe he is in it, yeah. Nope, he is. Michael Rooker is in it as well.
That makes sense. He does like Michael Rooker.
It will make your skin crawl. It is...
will make your skin slither, though.
It really will. It's one of the grossest.
I don't want that. Like,
no.
You're like,
I'm down for, I'm down for kind of the roller coaster experience of the horror genre sometimes. I'm just not like...
Yeah. Well, and James Gunn's...
Not going to embrace that slither.
Yeah. Well, and James Gunn's sensibilities, like it's
right.
very funny. It's very kinetic in its pacing, and it is really enjoyable. So there was a time before all the votes had been tallied, which again, listeners, your votes matter. But before the list had been tallied, this was number 1. This
on
was
the show and in life. Vote.
They do. But Slither hovered at number 1 for a little while. The next 2 on the list obviously eventually overtook it, but it hovered at number 1 for quite some time. And I do think it's a very beloved film, sort of a cult following type of film. I can't remember a lot of specifics except for a lot of body horror. It is a very gross film to watch, but again, very funny, fast paced, strong performances, and I remember having a lot of fun with it when I saw it first. So, yep, that is your number 3. Number 2 is one. It's in a very, very small community of films that is a remake I consider to be objectively better than the original on which it's based, and that is directed by Alexandre Aja, who also directed High Tension and Crawl. Both have been discussed on this film in some capacity, and it is the remake of The Hills Have Eyes. This was a film in a stream of like Michael Bay produced classic horror remakes. Like they started remaking a bunch of they remade Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and House of Wax and all these others. And The Hills Have Eyes was just one in a stream of them. And most of those films I consider to be pretty dramatically inferior to their original counterparts. This is an exception. I don't really care very much for Wes Craven's original The Hills Have Eyes. I kind of recognize its place in the canon, but I don't enjoy watching it very much. This Alexandre Aja's version is a film that, rough as it is at times to sit through, and it is uncomfortable to sit through, I think has a lot of very interesting things going on in it, and I'm appreciative of it, even though it's a difficult and challenging watch, because it's very violent, sometimes very violent to some very vulnerable characters, which is painful to sit through, but there's some really interesting things going on in it that I responded to a lot. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it's as high on this list as it is, because I do think for those who have seen it, it's a really strong viewing experience and leaves a pretty indelible impression. So yeah, that's your number 2 on the list. Paula, you have the distinct privilege of giving us number 1.
What? That's my get hype sound.
It was very effective.
I knew exactly. I didn't think you were having a seizure at all.
It's like, what is happening?
Wrong choice.
Number 1, your number 1 movie is The Host, directed by Bong Joon-Ho. What?
I love how
Fog
your
Cannon
hype
174.
It's true. Fog Cannon 174. I love how the hype machine eventually evolved into like a chicken. That was beautiful. That was great.
You know what? You just gotta let the hype like roll through you and just express itself however it wants to come out.
Which came first, the hype or the egg? Nobody knows.
Wow.
No one
just
knows. You
happens.
can't know.
It's impossible.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is your list of the top horror of 2006. Before we move on into our discussion about the host, Nathan, would you do us the honors of pulling up Box Office Mojo to find out the top 5 grossing box office films of 2006 before we move on? And meanwhile, let's take a look at this list. I do find this list really interesting. I see a lot of sort of self-referential and almost parody type films in this list. I see Behind the Mask definitely fits in that category. Snakes on a Plane definitely fits in that category. I do think it's interesting, again, that the upper tier are some films that are a bit more challenging, particularly entries 2 and 3. I mentioned that we were going to start to get into some films that are a bit more graphic in nature, push the boundaries, begin to be a bit more extreme in their viewing experiences. Bug definitely falls in that category for a number of reasons. So I think this is where we're starting to see something emerge where, at least in the filmmaking sensibilities in a lot of ways, and of course the anomaly on the list is Lady in the Water, but I want to reemphasize, I think Lady in the Water only shows up in a top 10 on a Fear of God list. But the rest of these films are beginning to sort of push the boundaries, either in visual ways or narrative ways, or in thematic ways. They're starting to sort of stretch at the edges of extremity and seeing how much they can push and challenge the viewer, which I do find pretty interesting. But Nathan, what you got for us?
You know, what's really funny is so this list of horror films and how few I've seen, which is not a reflection inherently of their quality, but just in terms of notoriety. Now looking at this 2006 worldwide box office, this is in the world in 2006. This is a bad year. This is not good. This sucks. Paula, I don't know if you know, but we've been, for these episodes, you know, we'll do our top 10 and then consult each year's worldwide box office. So number 5 is Night at the Museum. Okay.
What?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The first one?
This is the top.
Interesting.
Yeah. This is the top 5 box office gross in the world in 2006.
Wow.
Number 5 is Not the Museum. The only movie on here that I actually would give some kudos to and like, really, is number 4, and that's Casino Royale.
Oh, yeah.
One of the early Daniel Craig Bonds.
A very good movie. Great action movie.
And another note I like, another little data point I like to throw out here is the difference between the number 5 and number 1. Number 5 had 574 million. Number 1 had over $1 billion, just over $1 billion. So, Night at the Museum, Casino Royale. Number 3 was Ice Age: The Meltdown. Come on.
Whoa, that's like a random. Maybe it was the second Ice Age. I don't remember. I
the first
I
one
feel like
would
I
just
had
be
to have
Ice
been the
Age.
second one, yeah.
Interestingly, before I go too far, even glancing at the 10 top 10 here, number 7 is X-Men: The Last Stand, which is a terrible movie.
That's an awful movie. Yeah.
So Ice Age: The Meltdown is number 3. Number 2 is a movie I must admit I've not seen because just all the associations with it, and that's The Da Vinci Code by Ron Howard, starring Tom Hanks.
I'm not surprised it's that high on the list.
Yeah, I'm not either.
What's really funny about that movie, I've had conversations about this with a few friends where that book was just a cultural phenomenon. And everybody was talking about the book. Everybody was sharing the book and talking about it, all these conspiracy theories about its validity and its reality and all these things coming up. And then that movie came out and, like, nobody cared anymore. The movie, like, silenced the conversation on the Da Vinci Code book.
And yet they made, like, 2 more movies.
Well, yeah, because he wrote other books about it.
Right,
And they just continued. But like, I remember how after the movie came out, it's like, okay, well, I guess there's nothing more to discuss. So we're going to move on now. Yeah.
Well, speaking of other things to discuss, we need to get to them. And number 1 on this list of 2006 worldwide box office, another dud of a film, that of, I'm not hiding my feelings here, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. Everything post number 1 is garbage.
Yeah,
Well, that's a pitiful
I did
film.
really love that first one, though.
Oh, the first one's great.
First one's wonderful. This is such a weird year. This is
Isn't
such a
it?
strange
That's
year.
bad.
I didn't realize that. That's pretty bad.
This is how little I'm sorry to cut you off so rudely there.
No.
This is how little I enjoy how impassioned I get about those Pirates movies. Is in the last year or so, my kids have like, just because they see them and they'll pick up on an actor or something like, I think the inroad here was Johnny Depp in Grindelwald, and so they become aware of this actor. And really funny side story inside of the side story is my mother-in-law went to see Crimes of Grindelwald with us, and she came out and she was like, "That guy really reminded me of Johnny Depp," and I was like, "Well."
It was
Mother-in-law. What do you know? Funny story.
I'm about to blow your mind.
Yeah.
Buckle up for this next revelation.
Sit down for a minute.
Sit down. Are you sitting down? You are.
Get a cold compress.
So anyway, my kids latch on to Johnny Depp. They decide they're interested in Pirates of the Caribbean. I finally buckle one day and show them the first one because I do like the first one, but know that the problem inherent to showing the first one is iTunes is like, oh, by the way, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 30 of them. And I think at a certain point, I like to watch movies the first time with the kids, big stuff like that. And I was like, whatever, y'all can rent it. I don't care. I'm not gonna watch this.
Y'all watch that on your own time.
Yeah, you're on your own, kid.
Wow.
Daddy's left the building.
We're not going to get a meaningful family experience out of this one.
No way.
No, not today. So that finalizes a rather dud of a year,
right?
Despite
how long we spent on it.
For 2006. So now it is time to discuss a film that I would say is far from a dud, is actually, given the year, is a bit of a diamond in the rough, and that is Bong Joon-Ho's The Host. Now, this film is and was remarkably popular. It was incredibly successful, financially, critically acclaimed. I have wondered, since this list was finalized, if the Host would still be number one, because remember, Slither hovered at number one for a while. I wonder if the Host would have made number one if not for the overwhelming affection for Parasite. I think there's a lot of attention.
Oh, people were thinking about that again right now.
Yes,
Yep.
And so I wonder if that kind of influenced that making the top of the list. Now, that's not to take anything away from The Host, because, I mean, spoiler alerts on my feelings, I think The Host is a remarkable film. I think it's an amazing movie. But I do wonder if part of the reason why it tops this list is fueled a bit by the affection for Parasite, which wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, was this each of your respective first time seeing it, or had you seen it already?
This was my first time seeing it.
Mine as well.
Wow. So, Paula, I'll start with you. Just general impressions of it. Like, what was your experience of or feelings about the film?
This film was really interesting. I didn't know what to expect going into it, and I feel like the entire time in the movie, I still didn't know what to expect while I was watching it. I found it really interesting. I feel like the tone shifts at a certain point in the movie. It starts out, I have a note down that I wrote down where I was like, there's a lot of weird falling over in this movie. Like, a lot of people just randomly fall over in this. So it started out kind of like, almost with like, these weirdly goofy moments, and then there came a point in the movie where I was like, oh, those aren't happening anymore.
Yeah.
And I found that really interesting. In general, I think the visual effects hold up pretty well, considering the year it was made and the absolute huge amount of work that it would have been to make that creature.
Right.
Yeah, this is actually my first, I haven't seen Parasite. This is my first movie from this filmmaker I've seen at all. So I don't know if it's representative of his other work or not. Yeah, I'm still kind of processing it a little.
Sure. That's fair. So it is so to put a pin there, he's a remarkably accessible filmmaker. This is pretty representative of, like, each of his films are distinct in their own way. So, like, to say, oh, he makes monster movies, that's not really the way in which that it's representative. But you talk about these tonal shifts. Sometimes like major narrative upending reveals happening late in the film as it does in this one, and so that is consistent. All of his films are great. They're all great. So any of his films that you come across, like really even the worst of them, is still remarkably watchable and entertaining. He's an exceptional filmmaker, a really exceptional filmmaker.
I also thought the ensemble nature of this movie I really liked.
Yeah. And that's a strength.
Every character has a moment, and maybe we'll get to this later, but especially at the end, something that stood out to me was that it took all of them to make the ending happen.
Oh, I know. And I love that ending so much.
It's was one of my favorite things, I think, about the movie, about watching it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Awesome. Nathan, what was your experience?
I loved it. No, I mean, so I'll try to quantify some of that explosive emotional energy.
I guess it's good I went first. I was like, here's a movie and here's my experience, and I'm processing.
I would have reeled in if you had negative things to say, but no, that's fortunate. So I had seen Snowpiercer years ago, but I didn't connect that to him as a filmmaker until my affection for Parasite started to develop. Gotcha. In other words, back then it was just, Chris Evans is in this, and I've heard it's really weird, so that was the draw. Right. I didn't know anything about Bong's career or his style. And so when we covered Parasite at the top of the year, and because of its Oscar plaudits, I have had an interest in going and checking out some of these, and so I'm really glad we covered this. And I love the feeling. It doesn't even matter what the content of the film is per se. I love the feeling of those swerves, of just a plot that you can sort of get the impression of, like on the I'm thinking of the image of like the oasis in the desert. You like, I can generally make out a plot there, but the fact that the amount of turns and swerves and pivots it makes on the way to it is really exciting as a viewer, and something I really respond to strongly in movies. And specifically a fun little story here. So I started it. I got about half an hour in one night, and then it was just late, and so then I, kind of paused that viewing and kicked off the next night, the second hour and a half, and despite the lateness of the hour in real life is what kept me from moving forward, despite where I stopped. So again, not knowing anything about the movie, listener, we're going to spoil this plot for you here in pieces, I suppose, but at the outset, you meet this dad character and his daughter, and he works or doesn't with his father, so it's a generational thing, grandfather, father, granddaughter. And all I knew was monster movie. That's really all I knew. I think probably months ago I had watched the trailer, but it'd been long enough that I didn't remember any real impression of it. So when Hanso, the granddaughter, this bedlam ensues. One, I was totally thrown that the monster gets revealed in the way he does as early as he does. I was like, oh, wow. We are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was like, I remember at the 30-minute mark being like, oh my gosh, it's only been 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so much has happened.
Specifically at 30 minutes. So what happens is the monster reveals himself and has this big bedlam on this park area. It's really amazing. It's crazy. Just filmmaking and just gripping. My wife, who doesn't get into this stuff at all, I was like, just watch these 10 minutes, and just made her watch until the end of that scene when Hanso gets taken. So first time I've ever seen the movie, Hanso gets taken, this granddaughter, his daughter, and I was just like brokenhearted. I was like, dang, this went dark quick, because you think she's dead.
Right.
And
the moment where he grabs a hand and then the camera shows that it's, I literally said out loud, oh, that's not her. I had multiple out loud exclamations in this movie, and that was one of the moments.
It was brilliant.
Well,
brilliant.
So where I had to stop the movie is the bedlam happens at the park. There's the memorial, and everyone's super emotional, and it's really impactful and sad. And then they're at the hospital, and I'm like, okay, it's getting kind of late. I should probably turn this off. And I kind of get the general gist of where this might be going. And he's getting a phone call at the hospital. Okay, whatever, another 30 seconds or so, and it's Hanso calling him on the phone. I was like, oh. What?
Right.
What?
Right.
Oh, dadgummit. I gotta go to bed.
See, I was like, I didn't think she was dead.
Oh, really?
When they were crying, I was like, I don't think she's dead.
Yeah.
Well, I guess
why.
just in the moment, because I was so ready to buy in on whatever it was giving me, I got the impression. I was like, okay. And because when the monster's across the river, when the dad, Gangdu is seeing the monster across the river, the monster's eating something, and it's a little obscure. And so it's like, oh, okay, well,
it does look
that
like
sucks.
He's eating her.
So it was a little unclear about her fate. Point being, that was a long-winded way of simply saying I had to break it up. And to its credit of this swervy nature, I was not prepared for him to get a phone call from the kid I thought was dead, and that was really great.
Yeah, his films all have that kind of quality to it, where they're a little bit difficult to categorize because of how complex they are. And it's really astounding that he's as accessible as he is, given how swervy his narratives are. For any interested party listening, as of this week, a whopping 4 of his films are streaming on Hulu. If you subscribe to Hulu, you could see Parasite if you've missed that somehow. You could see The Host. You could also, if you wanted to go deeper into his catalog, see a film that he made called Mother, which is also pretty. It's probably his. I think it's probably his darkest film.
Did they remake that with, wasn't Jennifer Lawrence in that? But that's a remake, or is that a different
unrelated.
Mother?
Unrelated.
Completely
That's
different.
so
completely
interesting.
unrelated.
Okay, totally different movie.
Yeah.
Got it.
Completely unrelated, and I think viewers, by and large, would probably enjoy Bong Joon-Ho's Mother more than they might enjoy Darren Aronofsky's. But the other film is actually his directorial debut called Barking Dogs Never Bite, which is more a comedy than any of his other films. It's more directly comedic. So you can also see his film Okja on Netflix. That's a Netflix original. So his films are very you could find them in different places with just momentary digging. But yeah, they're all really interesting, really accessible, and they all have that quality of being a bit difficult to grasp from a distance. You just kind of have to experience them, buckle up for the ride, and chances are very, very strong you're going to enjoy having seen one of his films. They're really, really great. I want us to keep kind of going on this likes-dislikes train. I have just 2 brief bits of trivia to cite. One, which is probably only of interest to me, but the other one maybe everybody will find interesting. In this film, the fight scene between the 2 brothers, Gangdu and Namil, that whole fight scene at the mass funeral was improvised. I don't know if...
I wondered, actually, if it was. It looked very real. I was like, that looks like he actually just kicked him in the face.
Yeah, it was very spontaneous, happened in the moment. The director kept it, really, a very sort of real, emotive moment that I found really impressive. The second thing and only other thing I wanted to mention is that, so Nathan had sort of summarized what we see very early in the film, but about the first 5 or 6 minutes is a very odd sort of history lesson on. It starts with a mortician in a lab, an American mortician with a Korean assistant, and the mortician is upset, perturbed that there is a lot of dust on a lot of these formaldehyde bottles. So he commands his assistant to dump all of the formaldehyde into this drain, which they know will leak into the Han River. And so that's the very opening scene of the film. The reason I wanted to point that out is because that mortician is played by noted character actor Scott Wilson, who's a favorite character actor of mine. He's been in just an incredible array of different films throughout his career, but he came to kind of popular prominence because he played the character named Herschel on the show The Walking Dead. Yeah, and And Herschel was like my favorite character on that show. I stopped watching that show quite a while ago, but I watched it when Herschel was around and loved Scott Wilson, and so I just had to give him a little bit of love. He sadly has passed away a couple years ago, but yeah, I really enjoy him whenever I can see him. So that was.
I thought this is where you were going. That is based on an actual event.
yes,
of
yes,
a
yes.
military
really?
sort
The
of
pouring the formaldehyde?
of a military sort of personnel ordering a lackey, not you, buddy. No one puts lackey in a corner. To dispose of toxic waste effectively, and eventually
crazy.
he got indicted for it. But I loved that opening sequence of just
it's great.
I love this feeling, and again, I've seen Snowpiercer, I've seen Parasite, I've now seen The Host, and so this doesn't happen a ton. I'm going to describe a thing that doesn't happen often, but is nonetheless exciting when it does. Of just like, I really like this guy's output. I'm going to just rest comfortably in knowing I'm in for a treat. That's a really exciting experience for a film. And Reed, if you're cool to dive into the River Han, and
let's do it.
I loved even just the staging of the park massacre or the park attack.
Yeah.
I mean, just stuff like that. You talk about, you've used the word accessible multiple times, even though it's not in English, even though it's a pretty wild, topsy-turvy kind of plotting, he's just so good at like staging and filmcraft. And that kind of maybe, I think, promotes that accessibility. Is you're like, I'm just really impressed with how you've blocked all of this and choreographed all of this.
It visually communicates the story really well. There's a particular scene that it's a little bit later in the movie, so we don't have to talk about it right now, but that stood out to me really well, where I don't think there is any dialogue at all, but I get. And it's weird. It's a weird moment, and I get it, and I loved it.
Go ahead and say what.
Talk about it. It's later in the movie, so it's later after they have escaped to the hospital, and they've gone back to the stand, and they're eating, and they're thinking about how hungry.
It's so good.
What is it, Hunso?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
How they're thinking about how hungry Hunso must be, and then suddenly she's there, and they all just feed her. I'm going to get emotional thinking about it.
It's lovely.
And there's no call out about like, this is in their minds. This isn't real. This isn't, it doesn't draw attention. It's just this moment, and and then it moves on. And it's the only thing like that, I feel like, in the movie. And I just thought it was so beautiful. And also, I would really like to eat a dumpling right now that I'm thinking about it.
Well, when that little actor who plays Hunso sat up from behind the table, my jaw dropped. I was like, what? Yeah. What is going on? Oh,
like, wait, what's going on?
This is beautiful.
Yeah,
it's great.
I loved it. And that was just, you just get from the visuals what is happening.
Well, and to tie a bow on that, and then Reed, please go where you're going here. I'm just on a thought here. I actually wrote down when so listeners, one, just watch it. If rent it for $5 or whatever on Hulu. I'm sorry, on iTunes, or check it on Hulu if you have it. It's definitely worth your time. This is an easy recommend. It's not overly gory or graphic or anything. It's just kind of wild in its narrative, but fun wild. So once they're all in the hospital setting, and I mean, Paula, this is your first time watching this too, but maybe this echoes for you in your initial viewing, Reed. You're kind of trying to orient, to who are these people? Like, what are the relationships between all these characters? Right. And so once it kind of clicked in, and this happens when they're breaking out of the hospital, and you sort of put together all the pieces. Okay, these are a trio of siblings, adult siblings, their dad. And what I actually wrote down was, I said, if this is basically a misfit family banding together to rescue their youngest member, I think I'm in love. Like, I just loved the energy of that. Like, oh man, this is awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what I have written down, they're all kind of screw ups, but they all rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
And I love how on board they all are with getting her. Like, she's not all of their daughter. And I know, I mean, I have a niece and a nephew, and I love them more than I knew was possible to love a person. And I did not give birth to them. So, like, I don't know why I'd be like, why do this aunt and uncle, why did this other brother and sister care so much? They're sacrificing so much. But I just love how much this family is on board to do whatever it takes to get her. And
absolutely.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. So all I was going to say is I get the sensibility that Bong Joon-ho truly trusts his audience. Like he's sort of, his films are sprawling. Most of them are, at the 2-hour mark or a little over 2 hours. So he trusts his audience to follow him wherever he's going to go. And so he does what that frees him to do is it doesn't demand that he set up a tremendous amount of exposition or a tremendous amount of explanation. He just sort of shows you what happens. And he is such a master at the show don't tell. In all of his films that I've seen, he just does almost no hand-holding. He just sort of presents these characters in their dynamics, it puts them through whatever he chooses to put them through, and then trusts that you will connect the dots and pick up the pieces. And he doesn't, make anything too heavy-handed in that regard, which again is part of what I think makes him so accessible, is because he's also not extremely abstract in his character development. These are, if you choose to engage these films, this film particularly, and any of the rest of his catalog, as you said, Nathan, I think so effectively, you're in for a good experience. You're just go ahead and watch the film, pay attention to it, but you're in for a really good experience. It's gonna be an enjoyable time. You're gonna have some ups and downs. One of the things I love about this film is it has its frights, and it has its heaviness and its emotion, but a lot of the times, even the thrills are undercut with some really effective humor. You talked about how everybody is on board for getting them. That escape, the first escape sequence from the hospital, it is so great, and I love how they're all racing. And they get into the van, and when they get into the van, they're like, "Where's Namju? Where's Namju?"
Yeah.
Where's her sister? How could you leave your only sister behind?
Oh my God! But then somebody makes, I forget who says it, but somebody says in passing, said, "Oh, she was always so slow." And then when they open up the door, she is literally just casually walking
over.
Well, and I think what you're identifying is something that's been subconscious to me in the 24 hours since I've watched it. But is bubbling to the surface like a toxic waste monster is these little random moments, things like that, things like I referenced it at the top of the show with what you were doing. I love when the grandfather is he's having a really impassioned, heartfelt defense of Gong-do, who has dozed off, and he's conveying so much love for this person and defending his shortcomings. Not only are the siblings totally dozing while he's doing this, but then he references his farts, and where I'm going with this is simply to say Bong Joon-ho, despite the wildness of the premises, knows real human interaction. These are just real character human moments. If you were sitting around with a real person and they had this issue, you would reference their farts. It doesn't matter how crazy the situation is, and stuff like that is just real indicative of another one that jumped out to me that I just love and is just great. Not only is it set dressing, I feel like there was some other movie I was just watching the other day. Maybe it was something the kids were watching that was real dumb, and there's no point to some of the stuff that happens on the screen. Is when late in the film, when Gong-do escapes from the lab, right?
Oh yes, right.
And there's just
such a
these
good moment. I was so excited when that happened.
But there's just these officers
they're just
grilling out. They're just grilling out. They're having a little burger cookout. And it's the movie does not call attention to it. There is nothing story-wise about it, except it's a human moment of these people, and I just love stuff like that.
No, it's so remarkable. It's so remarkable, and then that makes moments like that make these sort of tragic moments, some of which we may get into a little bit later, but I mean, danged if I didn't legit tear up when the dad dies, and I knew he was going to.
That was great. I mean,
not
great, but yeah.
I audibly cried during that moment. That one really I felt so profoundly sad
Well, all those human layers, like, you know,
Yes,
he
yes.
asks the brothers about their weapons, and Gongdu says, "I've got one left." He takes it, and then Grandpa raises the shotgun. There's this masterful editing happening there, where I can't remember who's first, whether it's the click with nothing or Gongdu counting. Do you remember this? He's counting.
I think
yes.
it's the click first and then the counting.
He realizes there's nothing left in the
Yes.
shotgun, and it's just
Yes.
this amazing moment.
But then when he looks and runs after, so this is what's so brilliant. He looks and runs after the dad, presumably to recognize, like, no, wait,
Right.
you don't have a shell in the chamber. And he looks at the dad. The dad has realized it. The monster is closing in on the dad, and the dad is looking at them and sort of waving them away, like, no, keep going, because he knows it's
I'm
it's hopeless for
sacrificing
him.
myself for you.
Oh my gosh. But what I love so much about that film, you talk about these human moments. What I love so much about that is that you have, at that point, you have Gongdu and Namil and Namju, and Namil and Namju have run away. They've taken the opportunity and they've escaped. Gongdu can't do it. He starts to, and then is still processing that his dad is gone now, and runs back and gets captured as a result of it. I'm like, what a bold decision for the filmmaker, because I'm sitting there like, the whole point of the sacrifice was to let you get away. But what human being could, if they were trying to process this, could actually run away? Like, it felt
good.
real that he would come back and that he would try to process, like, what's going on, and ultimately get captured as a result of it. So to your point, like, he's such an observer of human nature, and such a skilled craftsman at being able to present that nature in a believable and accessible way, and it's remarkable. Another moment that I love, there's, it's funny to me, I'm realizing right now, even though it's peppered throughout my notes, there's a number of, like, escape moments in the film, like
Yes.
like in different contexts, like we've mentioned the escape from the hospital. I love the brothers' escape when the friends
it's
try to get
great.
him. Oh my gosh, it's
I
wonderful.
mean, in the office space, the office
In the
setting?
office.
That's
Oh,
great.
yes.
Well, I
Gosh,
love
it's fantastic.
what's so great about that moment is maybe it's just me, but up till then, you kind of don't like him. He's kind of
yeah,
and
more of
that's
an
maybe putting it
antagonistic
too strong.
figure.
You're introduced to Gongdu, so you're predisposed to liking him. Namil shows up; they're at odds with each other, so you kind of don't care a ton for him initially. So I just love that all of a sudden we're totally bought in, because we are part of the crew trying to rescue Hanso.
Yeah.
And so you're like, no, get it, do whatever you got to do.
It's so
Put that
great.
paperclip on that plug.
Oh, that
Oh
was
my gosh,
great.
it's
That
so
was
great. God, it's great.
Well, and
yeah.
speaking of being on board with the siblings, in the That Ain't Right column here is part of my describing earlier about my willingness to let a filmmaker I trust just take me where they want to take me is I'm not thinking ahead much. I'm not thinking, hey, where this is going. So I was totally unprepared, even though they telegraphed it a mile away, for Namju to take her Rambo action pose, her Merida pose, targeting the monster, and to just totally get swiped out of the way.
Yes, yes.
I mean, I was not ready for that. I was like, oh man, this is awesome. She is going to, oh, no. Nope, she is in the gutter. She has been just thrown aside.
What's so great about that? God, see, like he so substantiates, his films hold up so well in repeat viewings because he substantiates earlier in a scene that has nothing to do with it that her main problem is she releases the arrow too late. She takes too long. And I'm like, that's so wonderful. He knows these characters. He knows that as much of a Rambo moment as that would be, she would not release that arrow in time. The monster would sweep her out of the way and sweep her into the gutter. And it's like, and it's so great. It's so great because those are the choices that make him such an exciting filmmaker, because it is. He's going to take he's not going to be stereotypical or take sort of the easy path. I want to I don't want to hurry us along too rapidly, but want to make sure we have some time to dive into scares and to themes. I have one more thing on my list that I wanted to make sure to mention. In this point, Paula, you referenced it earlier, and then I'll give each of you the opportunity if you have any more likes, dislikes to mention. But that final collaborative assault that ultimately takes down the monster is, forgive me, it is so badass. It is just awesome. Like, you have the Agent Yellow pouring in that like stuns him. Then you have the random homeless guy that was like an extraneous figure in the film, pours the gasoline on him.
Yes,
then
when I saw that, I was like, oh.
Oh, man, it's great. And then Namil is going to, like, throw the Molotov cocktail, but then he drops it.
This was
and you're
my
like,
other, like, speak out loud. I went, oh, no. When that happened.
So
I exclaimed.
But then the moment that kind of got robbed from us because she releases too late, then Namjoon totally comes in to hit the bullseye. Man, it's awesome. But it all, like, that would be awesome enough. But then it culminates in Gongdu straight up impaling that beast. Like, it's an amazing
when the pole
sequence.
comes off of his hand and you have that visual of the imprint of the circle in his
Oh
palm,
my
I loved that shot.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's really, really affecting. Honestly, like, there's so many things about this film that I could mention that I love. Do either of you have any more likes, dislikes that you just don't want to escape? I
have one moment.
Yes, go ahead.
In the hospital, after I have a hard time with the names. What was his name?
Gongdu, the main one.
Gongdu, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
When Gongdu has been captured and they are doing all kinds of, they're trying to sedate him, all of these things or whatever.
That's rough.
And then the American doctor or military person comes in and they're talking, and I was like, he was like, tell us what's going on. And Gongdu is talking about why no one will listen to him. And I wrote it down. He said, my words are words too. Why won't you listen to my words? And
oh my gosh,
I just loved that line and I loved that moment. And then it hurt even more because they still don't listen to him. I was like, oh, these guys maybe will help him, and they don't at all.
But did you catch? I'm going to add on to this scene. So I wrote this note under theme. I am not intending us to go there right now because I don't totally know where to go with it. But I don't think this was a glitch of the iTunes digital file that I rented. But when that's happening, so, Gongdu gets taken after he stays too long with the grandpa. He gets effectively lobotomized, which is just a terrible scene. Well, Paula, to your point, that moment when this SOB American doctor guy is good copping, playing the good cop moment, and you learn, the viewer learns that there is no virus. It's just this monster they're trying to catch or something.
Right.
This tissue sampling, which is real harrowing. So,
oh my gosh.
Gongdu, so the sequence here of what you just described, Gongdu starts to get emotional in response to the interrogation and verbalizes. Well, there's no subtitle to what he says. Then the interrogator interprets what he says for us. And that's when, and it is subtitled, Gongdu says, please don't cut me off. My words are words too. Why don't you listen to my words? Point I'm trying to make here is they don't subtitle when the interrogator then interprets for him. And I just thought, if that's intentional and it feels like it is, it's a master stroke of just oh my gosh.
No, it's pretty brilliant.
When we talk about it.
No, absolutely. Really, really powerful line. Nathan, did you have any more likes, dislikes before we move into scares?
These are like hyper minor quibbles because I loved the movie, but one, I just don't know enough about lobotomization to know how able-bodied and minded he'd be able to be after that to escape.
I think
it seemed to me like it just didn't work.
That was my thing. I think it was an unsuccessful lobotomy because I think he was feigning that it was effective, and then when he picks up the syringe and overpowers the nurse,
I'm on board with it.
It
just was took me a minute. And the only other thing, which is just a quibble, is because there's so much going on in the second half of the film, I started to lose my sense of time, like chronology. Like I can't tell For instance, it most notably when Namil is invading the corporate office. I'm like, how far forward are we in time, if at all? Anyway, so I don't care. It was just a little confusing and hard to root myself or ground myself in a chronology.
I had that same thought, especially when the kids in the sewer are talking about how hungry they are. And I'm like, I wonder how long have they been able to live with no food? I wonder how many days have gone by. I also had that question.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. There are some in a straight up monster movie. I think for the most part, it's not really very nightmare inducing, but there are some just really, really effective scares. The one that I'm going to reference right now, we've already talked mostly because we've already talked about it. I think probably the most gruesome thing about this movie are the tests that they run on Gongdu. Like
Yes.
It's terrible.
The scenes where they're like doing the tissue sampling you mentioned earlier. They've got him harnessed for that eventual lobotomy. Those are the worst moments in the film in terms of just raw gruesomeness.
It's funny you cite that. It's funny you cite that because my heart was so in the film by that point that when it starts getting super dark there, I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be okay if this is going to suddenly take a really nihilistic turn. I was like, are we all going to die?
Yes.
I also had a moment where I went, I think everyone's going to die in this movie.
I know. I was really worried for a minute there.
Yeah. What did you guys have listed for scares? I've got a couple more, but I don't want to steal anybody's thunder.
Also mentioned already, and it's early, but I mean, when Gongdu rises in the park and is not holding Hanso but is holding someone else.
Yes.
I mean,
gosh.
your stomach and heart fall, like, oh my God. Just because again, you're trying to sort of acclimate to what the film is doing at all at that point. And so, even as little as I totally understood all of the relational dynamics, I knew this is bad.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Paula, anything for you?
I have the moment when the monster comes into the sewer and they're like, oh, I wonder what, maybe the body that it's going to drop down will have like a cell phone or something that works. And then it just vomits out all the bones.
That ain't right. Oh my gosh. That was rough.
And then the beer can.
Yes.
After she had just been thinking about a beer can because it was making her think of her dad. Like, that moment I found horrifying, basically.
Well, and what's one? It's dreadful, and it is. I have it written down in all caps. The monster coughed up all the bones. But what's remarkable about that moment, from a just film experience perspective, is you don't realize until the monster coughs up all those bones that you've been kind of relaxed to the monster's threat. Oh, yeah. No, he just captures them and drops them down in the sewer like his little pets or something. But it is that moment that you realize, oh no, the ones he coughed up are merely the ones he's saving for later. And it's like, that is, it's so fantastic, again, as a storytelling rhythm, because he has effectively sort of relaxed and eased you on the threat of this beast, only to crank it up to 11 when it coughs up, because it's just a mountain of bones. I mean, it is an overwhelming amount. And then one for me, probably my biggest one, is when, oh gosh, and the staging of the sequence is so brilliant. When she jumps for the rope that she's made.
So good.
And,
it's so good.
And then she registers that she's like suspended in air, and you think, oh, she caught the rope because you see the thing. But then it goes down to the little boy, and the little boy is like wetting his pants from something, and you're like, what's happening? And then that's when it reveals that she's not caught the rope. The monster has caught her with its tail.
That's so
great. And then even further to that, the sequence like nail-biting suspense. But that's when you realize, as they do, a bit too late, that the monster was not asleep, but was merely waiting for them to emerge from their little hiding spot so that it could grab them. And that's just, oh man, the whole sequence is just, it's completely fraught with incredible suspense, and I think it's brilliant. It's one of the most brilliantly staged moments I've ever seen in a monster movie.
Yeah, I had that one on my list as well.
So sorry for stealing your thunder there. Sorry
no,
about
that's
that.
okay. It's your podcast. You know.
You know what? I'll come on.
She
I'll
she
come
has
on
like
Death
15 of them, so you know.
I'll come on Death by Monsters, and you cannot let me talk. That'll be your revenge. So,
guys, this is Reed. Just talk over him for an hour. He's good.
the last one I have mentioned, and then you can reference whatever else you have is I just wrote down that moment when everybody on the curb is wearing masks and the guy coughs and then spits into the gutter water and a vehicle like splashes it on it. It's a little too real right now. That's all just a little too real. So that was the last I had on my little sort of scares list. So do either of you have anything before we tread some deeper waters?
Paula, you got any other scares?
I thought of another moment. I don't know that it really counts as a scare, but I'll say it anyway. Because I thought of another moment that I found just really effective, and it's when they see the hand at the end. They see the hand reaching when the monster's dead, and they see the hand reaching out, and he grabs it and pulls out the kids, and they're clutching each other.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
I found it moved. I found it really moving.
It's
because
very affecting.
the same thing. Maybe this is more diving into theme now that I think about it, but it's that same thing of just the way the rest of her family was immediately on board with working together to try and get her. She was just immediately on board with trying to protect this other person.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who needed help. She just took that in stride. I'm in charge. I'm going to help this person who is less capable than I am. It's the end is just so sad. Okay.
Yeah, no, the ending is pretty devastating because if you haven't seen this film, and please watch it, but the entire film narratively is based around this, about Gong-do trying to get his daughter back and trying to rescue her. So in the end, when she has lost her life protecting the life of this other little boy, and she ultimately, it's like this, they gave you this big fake out because you see her quote-unquote death in the first 20 minutes of the movie. Then she calls him, so she's alive, and now this entire film is based around her rescue attempt, or their attempt to rescue her. So then ultimately when she dies, I mean, it's a huge, the rug just gets pulled out from under you. I mean, it is really a devastating moment. It's a powerful moment. I don't dislike the choice. It's just very difficult not to be really affected by it and not to be really sort of devastated. Might be too harsh a word, but it's an incredible gut punch when that happens.
Well, do you care if we talk about that?
No, please.
I actually, other than what I found of the brilliant sort of editing about the subtitles when Gong-do is being interrogated, I didn't write a ton down for theme, but the scene y'all are describing is something that's been on my brain and heart. And as I've tried to process, okay, what do I think this movie is after? And I don't have an answer to that question yet. And so I pose a question to the three of us to kind of just sort of feel our way around in this, the gullet of this river monster. And the question, and I'll follow some of the behind the thought of it after I pose it. But the question was, why does Hanso need to die in this story? Like, why is that an important element? Because clearly it is. As Reed, as you sort of just described, you kind of have the fake out early on, and at least I got the impression we might be heading for a reunion. Grandpa's going to pass away because your Joseph Campbell, your old wise man, has to happen.
Right. Sure.
But I kind of wrestled a little bit with just, and again, it wasn't what a bad choice, what a wrong choice. I trust this storyteller implicitly, and so it's more just I need to figure out my thoughts around that choice, not questioning it itself, because so much of the spine feels like it's the family, yes, but even specifically Gong-do as a father, right? And can he rise to responsibility in that role? Like, Maybe I'm adding too much to it, but that feels like a lot
I
of
think
what's
that too. Yeah.
being stirred in the pot of the film, and he has his helpers, which is his siblings and father, to point the character in this direction. So it feels a little counterintuitive, although very human and very real. People pass away, to rob this character at the end of the thing he's been pursuing the whole time.
Well,
And so I've just do what?
Has he been robbed? Or has he stepped up to the ultimate choice of fatherhood when he didn't? I mean, from what I can understand about Hunso's birth, I mean, I don't think that was planned. And then the mother ran off. And so he was kind of forced into this situation that he wasn't ready for and couldn't really do. And now he does not have to be the father of this little boy. He could have taken that little boy to family services or whatever and washed his hands of it and had been free of responsibility. But in this moment, he chooses to step up and take care of this person.
Well,
and I'll even
so I feel like that's part of it.
Go for it, Reed.
Well, and so I'm sorry that this film's so exciting. It just bursts the
And
thing.
speaking of washing your hands, wash your hands. Okay.
yes. But honestly, like, not only stepped up, you mentioned he could have dropped him off to family services, could have let him die, because when he comes up to that boy, he does not merely like take a crying, helpless little boy in. He fights to revive him, because the boy was in the monster's mouth too. And so what is an element among many that is deeply affecting to me about that moment is he registers, she fought to save you. I can't save her. I can save you. I can finish what she started.
And if I save you, I'll have a piece of her because you were with her down there.
Well,
Yes.
and Reed, you just identified this too. Because neither of you are saying this, but I think it is valuable to sort of allow Hansu not to just be a prop to Gongdu's emergence and role. And so, And so what I think is really beautiful and fascinating is the way he finds them is Hansu teaching him how to now move forward, right? It's in other words, Hansu's actions through this film have to matter to the heart of it, right? The meat of it, the essence of it.
Right.
And so I will admit I'm doing a lot of mental legwork to get here, but clearly a lot fires for Gongdu in that moment of she's been alive, she's stayed alive, she has fought, she has survived, she has thrived, she has not just done all of that for herself, but she has now done this for this child too. Thus, all the things he's done to try to rescue her can now be pivoted into her sacrifice can teach him now what it truly means to step into that role. I don't know. Again, I'm just trying to feel through some of these thoughts.
And what we're left with is a haunting and, in its way, remarkably beautiful image of them, so of Gongdu and the little boy, who we can safely presume he is adopted, and he is in this their food stand. He's running the food stand that previously belonged to his father, and I love that the final image is of him and the boy in the little food stand, like that is acting as kind of their home, but it's snowy everywhere around, like they're just in this little pocket. But he is now, I don't know if you picked up on it the same way I did, but I get the impression that he's like now like self-appointed guardian of the river, that he's like self-appointed sort of like that cool. He's there because when he's in the food stand, that's like the first moment that we see him in that. Afterwards, the boy is sleeping, but he's watching the river, and he's like sort of primed if anything were to come out of it again, that he's there and he's going to kind of step up and be that protector, which again, like the moment where their father, all of him and his siblings, that their father was trying to sort of defend Gongdu in that moment that is both heartfelt and comical we referenced earlier, he said, like, Gongdu is the eldest sibling, and so I don't recall in this moment if their mother ran away or if their mother died somehow. I don't remember exactly if the story tells us exactly why.
I don't think they tell us. He's just like his mom wasn't around or something.
Yes,
there wasn't a mother.
Yeah, there wasn't a mother. So Gongdu had to kind of step up and be the protector, and said he had to deny himself protein and everything, and so that's why he's kind of narcoleptic and falls asleep sometimes in presumably tense situations. But I just found that really touching, that in the end he's got this boy with no family, and now this man with no daughter, and they found each other, and they've positioned themselves in a little food stand next to the river, and they're going to do what they can to sort of just keep watch. And I don't know. It's a powerful metaphor that I don't even feel like I'm really sufficient to unpack in the moment, but it really touched me. That final scene, just in so many ways. And I love that they're watching the news, and they're watching some American press briefing, and then the little boy's like, no, turn it off, because he's like, do you want to watch something else? It's like, turn it off. Let's concentrate on eating. They're just going to be together in that moment and eat their food. And so he turns it off, and I don't know if you guys caught this. This is probably one of the most heavy-handed elements of the film, if there are any, that the final word spoken in the film is spoken by the American delivering the press briefing, and the final word is misinformation. And that is the very final word of the film. And that is the word we're left with as he clicks off the TV, and then he and his new adopted child are going to sit in this stand, and I'd like to express a thought really quick. It doesn't have to go much further than this, and then I'd invite either of you to either respond or we'll see where it goes from here. But one of the things that because I didn't realize, and obviously we've been letting the listeners to at least some degree guide what our content is going to be through this season, because we let the listeners vote on what the list is. Whatever rises to the top of the list, or we may or may not pick the very top slot, but whatever's there, that's what we're going to kind of focus on. So top spot was the host. We decided to cover the host. And then, as a fundamental sort of element of the plot, is this threat of a virus and this governmental response. And in the process of the navigation, there's this entire dialogue about misinformation and the government in this story kind of trying to cover up the culpability of the creation of this monster with all of these sort of fabricated pieces of information. But what we're left with, and here's what I found so powerful, I'll do my best to express this concisely and then shut up. What I found so powerful is that this film that was made freaking 14 years ago, amidst all of this craziness, what the film leaves us with is one more sort of talk and talk about the spread of misinformation and whatever it is, and then we're left with them just sort of deciding to turn it all off and to just sit and eat together and just be together and concentrate on eating. And it is contemporary to the time that it hit me this, but guys, that bowled me over, knocked me down in terms of just cut out the noise for a minute. Just cut out the noise for a minute. Sit at the table with who you're with, guardian over the river, amongst the people that you now care about, the people in your charge, the people in your care, the people in your circle, and just concentrate on eating. And as the snow falls around them and the lights quietly dim. God, I found that beautiful. That was just so much about it, and so prescient for the time that we're in. And I know that I actually am actively choosing not to dig in, because I don't think it's a very fruitful conversation. At least my contribution to it wouldn't be digging in on sort of the misinformation element of it. That's worth talking about if we feel like it is. But for me, the moment hinges on they turn the TV off and they sit together and they choose to be together. And so to me, one of the things that I keep thinking about, my wife and I have speculated about it in this time, and I know that I want to be sensitive to the fact that everybody's situation is different. If you're in the healthcare field, if you're in the grocery field, then you're going to work. If you're considered an essential business, then you're still going to work. All of that's still happening. But one of the things that still so stands out to me is there's a lot of people at home right now and somewhat stuck at home. And to me, one of the things that we've reflected on so much is we're spending more time together, like as a family unit. We are fortunate enough that my wife and son and I are all healthy at the moment, and we're together. And to really, as emotionally distressing as so much of what's happening is, like, to try to pay attention to the cherishing of that dynamic. There's a lot to be grieved, and there's a lot to be concerned about, but not to miss in that moment, to use the momentary language of the film, like turn out the noise for a second, sit at the table, play the game together, eat the food together, talk with one another, like be present in that moment with one another. And that just really affected and as I said, bowled me over for what it's worth. But in responses.
Well, and to add to your mix there, that only will enhance the poignance of it, is not just turn off the misinformation, but, and both Gongdu and this little boy know this, there are monsters, and people you love might and will die. Now turn it off and be with those who need you and who you love. And that's really powerful.
Oh, it's very affecting, very affecting. And that is one of my major sort of takeaways of the film. And you know, we never, well, I shouldn't say we never try, and I think rarely do get like super preachy on this show. I mean, maybe listeners would disagree, but I feel like we try to have just a real honest conversation, which may sometimes come off preachy when we're passionate or opinionated, but
we are never passionate or opinionated on this show, just so it's clear. That doesn't happen.
Sure,
I have no opinion about that at all.
And I feel very
self-aware,
about that.
apparently.
Yeah. You know.
It is all the things. But I'm thinking about, you know, like, and God, how hard it is in seasons like this to take seriously Christ's commandment not to worry for your life or what you'll eat or what you'll wear. Like how challenging and difficult it is in this particular season to, like you said, Nathan, like to know that there are monsters afoot, or at least that there were, and that there might be more, and to know that loss is real and loss is possible, and yet to take seriously the commandment, I'll call it a commandment, the compulsion that Christ gave us to, you know, worry not for your life and consider the lilies and these kinds of thoughts that try like little echoes in the darkness to reverberate and I do think the only way that we can come remotely close to truly appreciating what that must feel like and how hard that must be to grasp is to turn out the noise, is to be more actively and intensely and intentionally present with those around us, and to put down the social media and to put down the phones and to, you know, to stop and to pause and just be there with each other. And I don't want to be insensitive. There may be some listeners out there who are saying like, well, I don't have that choice because the people that I would love to be with don't live with me and I can't go visit them. I recognize that, and I don't want to be insensitive to people who might be in a different position or station. But I think even in those conditions, there's something to be said for being present in the moment and being just having the scales fall from your eyes of exactly how much we typically concern ourselves with in our daily striving that maybe really aren't of the essence, and really getting down into what that essence must be and what that essence must look like, which might be as simple as, you know, it harkens back to the moment that we mentioned earlier where they're all sitting at a table of ramen and dumplings and wondering like, yeah, Hanso must be really hungry, and suddenly they visualize her there. She's not there,
It's but so good.
but they visualize her there. And then now Gongdu and this little boy at the end, they are there and they are present with each other. And just love that the little boy is the one who says it. No, concentrate on eating. And then he listens. God, it's so beautiful. I could go on for another hour. That's so, so beautiful.
Now I just want to watch the movie again.
Paula, I feel like I've sort of talked over both of you. I know Nathan responded a little bit. Do you have any other sort of thoughts or any sort of expressions, elements you want to highlight, or even just general thoughts about it in general?
I don't know. I was just thinking while you were talking about how difficult it is to experience that still small voice when you aren't allowing yourself to have quiet time, and how I found it in some ways even more challenging right now, even in an isolated setting, to find that quiet time, because I found my brain to be, it's hard to be quiet when it's quiet sometimes.
Right.
And so sometimes the impulse is to go to the news or go to social media or fill the worry with information, and how that may in some scenarios not facilitate the ability to experience God or or truly experience the people around you, if you have people around you. You know, I'm also lucky I have, my partner I am quarantined with my partner right now. I would be having a much harder time if it was just me in an apartment.
Right.
But I don't know, I was just thinking about that, the challenge of being quiet in a time that is worrying, and how that does relate to the end of the movie here. Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want to, as I've said before, I don't want to belabor the point or keep us talking for the sake of talking. But and if you guys don't have anything particularly burning to express, maybe we go to the fog meter. Or Nathan, if you have something that you want to make sure you express, we can pause for a moment to do that.
I appreciate your willingness to pause for me. I mean, I could, but we maybe on the host part 2 we'll come back around. Just whatever you do, please don't cut me off. My words are words too.
God, what a beautiful. My words are words too. Absolutely, amen. Well, then with that, let's take our words into the fog meter, which is our very specific metric of fear and God, where we rate these films or whatever content we cover on their scares and their substance. So I'll lead the charge with fear. A little difficult for me to really categorize this film in a fear measurement, because I feel like it is far more thrilling and emotional than it is necessarily scary, although the creature is very effective. We haven't talked very much about the creature design.
I love the way it moves. I love the way it's designed and how it moves. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Which was very, Bong Joon-Ho had said it was very like directing another actor in the film. Like, he was very deliberate with the structure of this creature, and so that the creature alone is enough for me to give this a 6. I think it's not really very nightmarish, but that creature is just fantastic. So I'm going to give it a 6. Paula, what would you rate it on fear?
Remind me. Oh wait, here we are. This is a scale of 1 to 10.
That's right.
It is.
It's interesting. It's like you said, I didn't find this movie particularly scary in the traditional sense. I did find it filling me in some cases with dread.
Sure.
More of an existential fear than like a jump scare kind of movie.
Right.
So I'd probably put it with that in mind. I'd probably honestly put it at like a 5, like right smack in the middle there.
Gotcha. Nathan, what about for you?
I think I will split the difference on y'all and go 5.5. It just isn't. I had to be that guy.
Hey, sure.
It.
What else is new?
I know. I was gonna say you know all too well. Yeah, it isn't scary, but I think that the gift Bong has of nimbleness of narrative can be, keep you on your toes and sometimes on your backside, because you're like, oh, I did not see that coming. So yeah, from that standpoint, I'll give it some points.
Awesome. Nathan, what would you say for the God meter, the substance factor, if you will?
10.
Ah, nice.
I don't know. I think he's really good, at least in this one, I know in Parasite as well, of dressing human drama and maturation up with thrilling convention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I think there's so much going on between Gongdu and his father, between Gongdu and his siblings, between Gongdu and his daughter, between the siblings and each other. There's all of these things are so richly drawn, but you could also just enjoy it as a creature feature if you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. Paula, what say you?
I don't think I'd give it a full 10. I'm somewhere between like an 8 and a 9, I think.
8.5 it is.
An 8.5 it is. I'll be that person. Nothing earns a full 10, a perfect score. Are you crazy?
We haven't done many of them.
That is true.
But there is, everything Nathan said. There is so much there. And so much of it is so cleverly set up and then paid off, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
I do wish I had an inkling that the brother was an escape artist right before.
Yeah.
His moment, they're like, he's an escape artist. I was like, is he? And that's what's keeping me from making it a 10. I'll say it.
That one little note. Do
That
better
one tiny
next
one.
time.
Please,
yes,
just be
do
a
better
better
next time,
filmmaker,
sir.
please.
As Nathan did with us, I'm going to split the difference between the pair of you. I think I'm going to go 9. And I feel like for humanity alone, like the substance, like the God meter can be measured in a number of different ways and can mean a number of different things. My 9
Heretic.
is almost entire. My 9 is almost entirely wrapped up in the human qualities of these characters and Bong Joon-Ho's apparently limitless powers of human observation and his skill at being able to express that in a really authentic way is just remarkable. So that means that we give The Host, Bong Joon-Ho's third film, a 7.5 on the fog meter, which is a pretty impressive showing by any measurement. But the real question at hand, Nathan, we already know you answer, but I'm going to come to you first to champion it again. Would you recommend The Host to any of our listeners that they check it out?
Any and all of them, and all the others who aren't listeners yet, so they can become listeners. No, I loved it. I thought it was great. It was exciting. It was, touching. It was, I loved it.
Paula, how about for you?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend watching this. There's not that many viewing experiences that make me exclaim things at my TV screen, and this one did it multiple times. So just based on that alone, yes, watch this.
Yeah, it's a really easy recommend. It's a monster feature that is not too scary, not too graphic, a thrilling experience. It has comedy. It has deeply felt emotion, lots of surprises. If you've listened to this and haven't seen it, we've spoiled most of them, but it is still a really accessible and enjoyable film. So yeah, 3 recommendations wholeheartedly. So that puts another installment of 2020 in the books for 2006. I want to say a very, very big thank you to Paula Deming of the Death by Monsters podcast and numerous other podcasts. Thank you so much, Paula, for coming.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I've had such a good time, and I just really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we hope to have you back again really soon. Nathan, as always, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And so next week, everybody, we are going to your top 10 favorites of 2007, which is a really interesting list. I've seen it. It's really fascinating. So we're going to be counting down your top 10 of 2007, and the film we are going to be covering in that list is Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat. That's R with the little apostrophe in front of it. Yes, Trick or Treat.
Have you seen that?
I think I have seen that one, yeah.
Really? That actually surprises me based on what you've said.
There's a few.
So,
I've seen a few random things. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. So that is a really interesting film. We've been putting like some disclaimers about discretion and discernment. I think that's probably a film that any sort of casual horror viewer can probably go into without much caution. But Trick or Treat, Michael Dartery's Trick or Treat, that is going to be our subject next week, along with your top 10 of 2007. Thank you again to Paula and Nathan. And as we say on every episode of this show, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. So, we'll see you next week, everybody.
Thank you, Paula.
Bye, everyone.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can start by visiting thefearofgodpodcast.com for all the latest news and episodes, or for merchandise and to contact us directly. You can follow us on Twitter at The Fear of God, on Instagram at Fear of God Podcast, or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. Special thanks to Jacob Hunt of jacobhuntcomics.com for our artwork, to Lee Wright, who helped me, Reed Lackey, write our theme music, and to Tyler Smith at morethanonelesson.com for making our show possible. Lastly, be sure to subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, and if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating and a review. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.